Terry's saying the record to the cloud.
You are being recorded.
Don't worry about it. I'll get it. There we go.
I got it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So on the screen, you'll see 8 sets of queries, and these come from SCYM, and we tend to use them every year. The first group of queries has to do with worship, and there are 2 of them. So I'm going to read the first 2. How does the Spirit illuminate our meetings worship? And as we ponder that query and all the others, just that we go into silent worship, and then from our turning to the light and trying to receive a less egoic perception of what the best answer is, we just come out of the silence and share it. So, how does the Spirit illuminate our meetings worship?
I remember from forums on this topic, these topics in previous years, Joanna Vaughn once mentioned that with each query, she takes out the word how, so that it then becomes, does the Spirit illuminate our meetings worship? And I found that to be a helpful way of proceeding in my own mind.
Well, phrasing the query that way, my answer would be sometimes it does, sometimes it's present, sometimes we're illuminated by it, and other times we're not. And sometimes we are, as individuals or a community, more open and receptive than other times. And it's, my experience is we really have very little control of it. We have to set the intention, we have to wait, be patient, and then see how Spirit responds to our attempts to be open to receiving.
I think we have to take cognizance of the fact that for most of this year that we're reflecting on, we've been worshiping in an entirely new way over Zoom. And that has had both positive and negative effects. The positive being we've had visitors who we haven't seen for many years. The negative being, I'd say, a good core of our regular attenders at meeting in person are not attending because possibly they're not feeling the Spirit over Zoom.
I think the effect on the participation of children is something to note. Most of our older children have not been around, and by older I mean children above toddler. However, this has allowed some of our infants and toddlers to be more present. So it's kind of a mixed bag there.
You know, it's interesting that the period that we are reporting on, being the period between yearly meetings, almost entirely encompasses the time that we have been meeting through video conference, the time of the pandemic. And it's placed, you know, a tremendously different strain on the context. And this feeling of, you know, how does it's caused us to ask the question, how does the Spirit illuminate? Is it necessary to have, you know, human bodies assembled physically in a meeting to sense the presence of God? And, you know, I resist the formulation of the Spirit working through Zoom because the Spirit doesn't do that. The Spirit is where we live and have our being. And to the degree that we can transfer that experience to a communal experience with each other over a video conference is quite remarkable. Though I agree that we do have to recognize that there's folks for whom this is not conducive. You know, we wouldn't want to be doing it forever, but I think that it's important to realize that we've kept the flame of the Spirit alive in our community over a very challenging time.
I think that during the last it's been almost a year now since we've been meeting via Zoom, but I think that that we still reflect that illumination of the Spirit. I think that through some of the things that we can't do because of we can't be physically close to each other, there's still things that we have offered, such as the COVID-19 fund and how that outreach is going, what's going on with the prisoners on death row, and some of those opportunities. Because I somehow, to me, those social gospel things are the illumination. The Spirit we may not be able to see within ourselves, but we do see some of the results of the Spirit, and I think that we've maintained that over the course of the last year, such as we can.
So let's turn to a second query having to do with worship. How do we encourage ministry and speak to deepen the spiritual life of the meeting and of individual friends?
It's been interesting to me that forum attendance has not gone down. It's at least what it was, if not slightly larger. Even granting that there are friends who don't come because of our remote approach.
Something that I feel like has sort of deepened our spiritual life is we just have been very open with sharing concerns and people that to be held in the light at the end of meeting. And I think that's been a really a good thing for everyone, since there is so much just trouble and concern and real worry out there, to be able to hold each other in the light like that.
Well, since we are reflecting on a whole year, I think it's appropriate to recognize Quakerism 101 and the broad participation that we get in that, especially since another one will be starting today. But certainly our previous Quakerism 101 was very successful. And the number of forums that we have on particular spiritual topics, whether it's an individual spiritual journey or an introduction to Baha'i, or a wide variety of forum topics, are one of our primary ways of broadening and deepening the spiritual life of the community. If we look at the weekly bulletin, the list of things that folks can participate in has gotten enormous, including Bible study and various links and references to PYM and SCYM activities, many of which are directed to spiritual deepening.
Continuing to nurture the involvement of children has been a real challenge, very difficult for us, and we really haven't managed to keep a full first day school going, but we have had some family events that children participated in really enthusiastically, being the Halloween party and the Christmas nativity play. We have, I mean, one of kind of an backhanded fringe benefit is that we've been doing things on Zoom is we save the recordings, and recordings of most of our forums and educational events and the children's activities are now available on the website, and that's nice.
If we look at the term ministry as broader than just speaking during worship, I think there are lots of examples of how, say, peace and social concerns has been reaching out. It probably fits into some other categories here, but ministering to the needs of people in our meeting who are separate and have been housebound for a while or whatever. Given the transformation that happened last March, we have been paying more attention, it seems like to me, and been able to provide worship and other services to those folks even more through the use of the Zoom connection.
On the question of ministry, I'm interested in what I heard someone say recently, which is that one of the benefits of Zoom is that we can all hear each other. And so, I mean, we still have, I don't know how to describe it, an intriguing relationship between silence and speech and spoken ministry. Often we go an entire hour with no spoken ministry. Those are illuminated meetings in many ways, but I wonder if Zoom has brought us a different relationship to the words of each other, not just through legibility, but also it's one of the only ways we have of communing with each other or reaching each other is through our voices. So I don't really know what the point I'm trying to make is, except that it's nice to be able to hear each other. And it's also nice when it's quiet.
I'm reflecting that we seem to be actually examining the state of the meeting much more often. As we sit here, I realize we have been discussing the state of the meeting in various small groups, and the state of each other, and the care of each other much more in this period. And so I feel like I know I mean, I really feel sad about the number of people who aren't participating. And I wish that maybe that's something, well, that's the future. We haven't been able to reach that, but I do feel closer and more in touch in the spirit, and sometimes in this time, but also the evaluation of how are we doing. We have a committee, the health committee, that meets regularly, and they sort of saying, how are we doing? And, you know, we're asking ourselves the question about racism, anti-racism, on a regular basis. So when we get here to the state of the meeting, I feel I know more of the state of the meeting than I usually do.
I was speaking earlier this morning with a friend of mine, a musician friend of mine that I actually used to play music with over 40, well, not quite 40 years ago, actually, in North Carolina. And we were talking about, we've been catching up, and because we hadn't really spoken in decades, but he was talking about when he lived on a sailboat. He lived on a sailboat, he and his wife. And he talked about how solo sailors, when they came into port, and he would meet up with them in the local tavern, he said inevitably those conversations would go on for for hours because of the need for that human contact that maybe somebody who was a solo sailor had been out at sea for weeks or even months. And we kind of likened that to today, and how in a sense we're sort of solo sailors, and I think the meeting provides for us that time to talk in the tavern, as it were, with each other, and to commune with each other, and that's certainly been meaningful for me.
So let's turn to our second group of queries having to do with meeting community. The first one is, how does our meetings community reflect its corporate spiritual strivings? And we might as well add the next two and we can do them all together. How do friends care for one another in time of spiritual or material need? And what role do children play in the meeting community?
I guess one thing I've just really loved seeing over this last year, just the question, how do friends care for one another in times of spiritual or material need, is just that we really do care for each other in times of spiritual and material need. That like the benevolence fund, we in material need, and just continuing to meet and try to do things continuously to fulfill sort of the spiritual needs of everyone in the community. And finally, the effort to get everybody who is eligible, trying to get them information about how to get vaccinated. And for people who might be struggling with that system, to try to help provide them with the information and the support they need to do that. I think those are really powerful and very meaningful and really crucial ways that we do care for each other as a community.
We should also mention the extraordinary generosity of friends, members, and attenders. The contributions to the COVID fund have been nearly $15,000 to this point. And it's just a remarkable outpouring of support that has helped with very real material needs.
Another reflection that I can see about corporate spiritual strivings is that we have 19 people today for the State of the Union, so to speak, the State of the Meeting report, when generally that's maybe 6 or 8 people would make it for the last years that I've been in. So clearly the striving is still there, and perhaps now we have a vehicle for allowing it to happen more readily, even if at a distance.
This may be ridiculously obvious, but I got confused about what query we are on, and my previous comments had to do with this one, not the first one, the comments about kids and what we were doing. So the note taker should take note of that.
This is probably also extremely obvious, but in what role do children play in the community during this time of COVID? Children's role has been, it seems to me, to bring hope and joy to many of us oldsters.
That just makes me mindful too. One of the great sources of joy during this time has been seeing how many babies our community has had during this last year. It's been wonderful, and and we get to see them too because of Zoom, and it's just a great thing.
Yes, the babies really are a joy to watch as they develop and get a little older. It's inspiring.
Less the mute button.
And there's Emberly waving at us. Or is it Emberly, or is it gone now?
Yeah, it was Emberly. It was Emberly.
It was him. Okay.
She's got a new puzzle, so she's not participating fully.
So let's move on to our third group of queries having to do with religious education. How has study deepened our faith and our understanding of what it means to be a Quaker? How have we explored issues of faith with newcomers, seasoned friends, and children?
Well, to not overdo a common theme, we've had much better participation in adult religious education forums prior to meeting because people are not struggling with commuting and taking the trips to the meeting to join in, and that's been a real positive contribution to expanding our understanding of various topics.
And at the risk of tooting my horn again, you know, I think having the videos, video recordings of all of our educational stuff up on the website is something that we'll have around for posterity as well. And we can expand our educational efforts beyond just who attends in the moment.
Just to mention one minor point, Quakerism 101 has, in the last couple, 3 years, turned into pretty much a regularly scheduled annual event. It was more sporadic in the past. So, for instance, we had Quakerism 101 as right as COVID was beginning, as I recall, and then we're having it again starting this month. So it's become, I think, since about 2018, a regular annual thing. And it's not just for newcomers. We've always had newcomers in Quakerism 101, but it's also been a chance for more experienced friends to reflect and discuss aspects of Quakerism and Quaker history.
I think it's probably worth noting, although I don't know the number, that we probably have somewhere between 30 and 40 adult religious education forums a year, which is quite a substantial effort in relation to this query.
It might be worth just putting in a clause in a sentence, just saying on the most varied themes. I mean, that, you know, all the way from scripture and Quaker history, all the way through community organizations that we want to hear from, and everything in between.
I'll do that.
Yeah, that was a point that I was really interested in it as well, that the religious education is extremely open to opportunities for us to hear from and learn from not just people with specific, you know, expertise, skills, or knowledge, but from each other, as well as from members of the community. So it's a very expansive notion of what religious and spiritual education can be. So.
My picture.
Is it a sheep?
He says my picture. It's my picture.
Yes. What's a picture of? Is it a sheep?
Something like that.
See.
One thing that we haven't touched on yet is the half an hour immediately following rise of meeting, which relates to these first three queries and in particular opportunities to explore issues of faith with newcomers, seasons, friends, sometimes children, usually not, but the various ways in which we've changed that period or made different accommodations or taken appropriate measures for increased sharing and in a spirit of worship and ministry has, I think, brought us together as a community, but also expanded worship in a nice way.
I'm just going to add to that, which is that because everyone is in the conversation, everyone hears what everyone else would say. Whereas if everyone were sitting at tables during having a friendly meal, there'd be a lot of different conversations going on.
Let's move on to the group of having to do with testimonies. How have we, as a meeting, witnessed to friends' testimonies? How has our meeting stood by faith against injustice and helped those in need?
I would certainly say that in so many different ways, from help to individuals through care and counsel and benevolence fund to more broad-based support through the peace and social concerns, and to our own understanding of different issues such as anti-racist awareness and studying that on a regular basis. We've been really, in some ways, prompted to reach out more than ever in concrete ways as far as living and embodying those testimonies. Our support for the FCNL advocacy team that several members are active with, prison ministry, all these different elements, I think, are even highlighted more since we've been under this COVID restriction.
It does make me wonder, though, again, as somebody who likes to play music and likes to play music with people, right now we're doing what we call woodshedding because we can't play with other people. So I wonder on our testimonies and on my own testimonies when it's safe for me to get back out and do things that are specifically focused on addressing injustice or addressing systemic racism, have I woodshedded enough to where I can go out with the energy necessary to make a difference? Because it does feel like we've done many things, but still the ability to do those things face to face obviously is not available to us right now.
Does it go there? No. These are too hard. Should we wait on these to get there?
I hope this doesn't sound like too much of a generalization or maybe even an inscrutable statement, but I think this last year, at least from, in my observation, has been an opportunity to become more aware of injustice within ourselves and the need amongst ourselves.
Is this a time or a place where we should mention specific minutes that we've taken together, like the one on police violence against people of color in June? I think that was June of last year.
And the one about the 13th Amendment. Also in June, I think.
Don't know the timing, but the query that we've been using at the end of meeting for worship with attention to business about how does this show our intent to be an anti-racist faith community.
Could you repeat that, please?
The query that is used at the end of meeting for worship with attention to business, I don't have the wording in front of me, but it has to do with how has the business we conducted reflected our intent to be an anti-racist faith community.
Thanks.
I think that it's an example of witnessing to friends' testimonies that we have in meeting for worship with attention to business agreed to a reduced rent for our tenant or tenants. I'm not quite sure about Austin Town Circa, but and also the sharing of funds that the meeting does with other Quaker organizations, and to a
Yeah.
certain extent with non-Quaker.
Oh, sorry. Just to clarify, that did extend to Austin Tonseka, that reduced rent, and the fund sharing as well.
And are we continuing to pay Candelaria? And how about the child care workers? No, but we did extend a little bit of money to them at the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we would have continued had it been possible. It just wasn't possible to administer that.
Another aspect of sort of a testimony, I would consider it kind of stewardship of our property, and the goal of maintaining that space in a way that contributes to the life of the meeting and sustains and develops and continues to improve. The whole kitchen remodel makes that space much more useful and hospitable. And that was a major investment for the meeting.
In the implementation of our COVID fund, we have prioritized those who are people of color and those who don't qualify for other aid from the city or from the national government, the state or the national government. I think that's important. Was an important decision. It was a decision that was made by the whole meeting. I feel really good about. I think that's a very important decision in terms of our anti-racism position.
I'd like to, I don't know if this has already been mentioned. I'm sorry if it has, and I just didn't quite catch it. The letters that our meeting sends to the governor and the Board of Pardons and Paroles, stating our opposition to executions pretty much on a monthly basis. That is definitely standing up to injustice. And I guess I also want to add that although it was not a member or even an attender at this time of our meeting, but one person who took on a pen pal relationship with a death row inmate maybe 5 years ago, Robin Story Dunn, has seen him through the legal process that resulted in his getting off of death row. And he's now in Houston living with his family, which is just totally awesome. And it wouldn't have happened if she hadn't done what she did, which was find him a great lawyer.
I see that we're sort of entering into that 10-minute space before meeting for worship. And I was just wondering if people would mind if I asked a quick sort of housekeeping question. In years past, we've had sometimes 3 State of the Meeting report forums. This year, we'd only scheduled 2. 3 felt maybe a little bit drawn out last year, so we just put 2 on the calendar. We've at least started to talk about half of the questions. Are we feeling like 2 is a sufficient number, or should we be looking at adding a third? Great, thank you. It looks like 2 is the consensus. I feel.
Either that or there's a lot of peace going around.
So let's transition into worship, preparing for worship, hearts and minds.